There are books that change the world, and then there are those accused of being written by the devil himself. For centuries, The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli has held precisely this place in history. Banned, feared, and labeled as a manual for tyrants, this masterpiece was seen as a threat to morality, a guide teaching the powerful how to manipulate and control without scruples. It said that no one reads this book unscathed. You either reject it entirely or become a fanatic obsessed with the game of power. Machiavelli was not just a philosopher or diplomat, he was someone who understood the raw and brutal reality of politics. He wrote his rules with cold precision, exposing truths many would rather ignore. To him, power is not achieved through naivety or absolute kindness, but through calculated strategies, unpopular decisions, and sometimes necessary cruelty. The Prince is not just a book, it's a moral bombshell. It dismantles illusions about human goodness and shows that virtuous leaders often do not survive in power. For Machiavelli, the world is immoral, and idealists are at a disadvantage in this game. But was Machiavelli truly so diabolical, or did he simply reveal uncomfortable truths? This video will dive into the most controversial ideas from The Prince, starting with a deadly lesson: the fall of idealism. To understand The Prince, we must first abandon any romantic notions about power and politics. Machiavelli begins his work by demystifying idealism, the belief that virtuous and well-intentioned leaders succeed simply by doing what is right. To him, this view is not just naive, it's dangerous. Governing requires far more than good intentions, and those who cling to idealism are doomed to fail. Machiavelli observes that history is filled with leaders who fell because they believed they could rule based on kindness or absolute justice. Richard II of England is one such example. Richard II sought to rule with fairness and compassion, striving to be a benevolent and kind monarch to his subjects. However, his inability to handle political and military matters effectively, coupled with his belief that goodness alone could resolve all problems, ultimately led to his downfall at the hands of Henry Bolingbroke, the future Henry IV. Machiavelli argues that the reality of power is harsh and often demands morally questionable decisions. Governing, he asserts, is not about pleasing everyone or being loved, but about maintaining stability and consolidating authority. A classic example of this is Machiavelli's notion that rulers should strive to be feared rather than merely loved. He doesn't advocate for gratuitous cruelty or arbitrary fear-mongering, but sees fear as a more reliable tool than relying solely on affection or public approval. Idealists, by ignoring this dynamic, are often destroyed by those who understand the real game of politics. The fall of idealism, therefore, is the first step for any leader who wishes to survive. This does not mean abandoning morality entirely, but rather understanding that the world does not operate as we might wish. It is a call to reality, an invitation to view politics as it is, a battlefield where traditional values can often be a hindrance rather than an advantage. This lesson, as uncomfortable as it may be, sets the stage for the next idea: the necessity of power. After all, without power, no ideal can be sustained. After dismantling idealism, Machiavelli moves on to one of the most fundamental concepts in The Prince: the necessity of power. For him, power is not just a means of governing, but the essential condition for any political action. Without power, a prince can achieve nothing, not even defend what he deems just or moral. Machiavelli makes it clear that there is no morality without power. Without it, a ruler becomes impotent, unable to implement their ideas, whether they are good or bad. Power is, therefore, the foundation upon which any political action must be built. Those who attempt to govern without acknowledging this are doomed to fail. Machiavelli is pragmatic. To be effective, a prince must first focus on consolidating their power and ensuring its stability. One of Machiavelli's most striking observations is that a prince must be capable of acquiring and maintaining power by any means necessary. This may include political maneuvers, strategic alliances, or even the elimination of enemies. He does not advocate gratuitous violence, but acknowledges that in extreme situations, force may be the only solution. A hesitant or weak prince will quickly be overtaken by those who play the game of power with greater skill and boldness. As Machiavelli himself famously stated, the ends justify the means, suggesting that any action, no matter how questionable, can be justified to achieve a goal. The emphasis on the necessity of power is crucial because it sets the stage for the next discussions on how to achieve and maintain it. This principle also answers the question, why do so many virtuous leaders fail? The answer is simple. Without power, nothing else matters. A prince must learn to navigate politics as it is, not as they wish it to be. Machiavelli is often accused of endorsing cruelty, and it's easy to see why this accusation arises when reading The Prince. He argues that in many cases, cruelty can be a virtue, or more precisely, an indispensable political tool. For him, cruelty is not an end in itself, but a strategy to ensure order and stability. What Machiavelli proposes is not that a prince should be cruel for the sake of pleasure or tyranny. Instead, he advocates for calculated cruelty in decisive moments to avoid greater harm in the future. Cruelty can be necessary to pacify a territory, eliminate enemies, and establish authority. Unlike a ruler who hesitates or is overly lenient, a prince who takes decisive and harsh measures early on can prevent more severe problems in the long run. Machiavelli cites the example of Cesare Borgia, an Italian leader renowned for his ruthless tactics. Borgia was not cruel without purpose. He understood that cruelty, when applied wisely, could generate respect and ensure that no one dared to challenge his authority. Fear, Machiavelli argues, is a more effective tool than love, because it is more consistent and less prone to emotional fluctuations. However, Machiavelli cautions that cruelty must be carefully measured. When used excessively, it can lead to rebellion and undermine power. The key lies in the wisdom to know when to be cruel and how to apply cruelty efficiently without it backfiring on the ruler. If cruelty is necessary, it should be swift and effective, ensuring that order is established without causing unnecessary harm. For Machiavelli, one of the greatest risks a leader can face is complacency. This false sense of security arises when a ruler believes their power is guaranteed and stops acting proactively to protect it. In The Prince, he explains that politics is a dynamic arena where circumstances can change rapidly, and those who are not prepared to adapt inevitably fall. Complacency, according to Machiavelli, is an invitation to disaster. Rulers who rely solely on luck, established alliances, or the unconditional support of their subjects end up losing control. He cites historical examples of leaders who neglected emerging threats or failed to respond quickly enough to counter them. These leaders, who often began with great promises, fell because they underestimated the unpredictability of power. Machiavelli emphasizes that a ruler must always be vigilant, never allowing themselves to be caught off guard by events. This includes constantly monitoring both allies and adversaries, as loyalty in politics is often fleeting. A complacent prince becomes an easy target for more ambitious and strategically prepared rivals. To avoid complacency, Machiavelli suggests that the ruler maintain discipline and determination, even during times of greatest stability. They should act as if their power is always under threat, even when it seems secure. This vigilant mindset enables the prince to anticipate crises and position themselves effectively to overcome them. By understanding the danger of complacency, the ruler prepares for Machiavelli's next teaching, the importance of being adaptable. Only those who grasp the ever-changing nature of power can truly master it. For Machiavelli, adaptability is an indispensable virtue for anyone who wishes to maintain power. He recognizes that the world is in constant transformation, and the most successful leaders are those who know how to adjust their strategies as circumstances change. A common mistake made by many rulers is rigidity. Machiavelli observes that some insist on sticking to a single style of leadership, even when it is no longer effective. He compared this inflexibility to the force of a river. When conditions are favorable, the river flows smoothly, but when obstacles arise, it becomes violent, causing destruction. Similarly, a leader who does not adapt to changes will inevitably be overwhelmed by forces they failed to anticipate. A lighter example could be the coach of a sports team who, despite the team's disastrous season, refuses to change their style of play or their ideology. In other words, they prefer to lose and get fired than admit they were wrong. Machiavelli exemplifies this lesson with stories of rulers who triumphed or failed based on their ability to reinvent themselves. He emphasizes that being adaptable doesn't mean being inconsistent, but rather having the ability to recognize the right moment to change approach. Sometimes it will be necessary to act with strength and authority. At other times, caution and diplomacy will be more effective. Machiavelli also points out that fortune plays a role in political events, but the wise ruler does not rely on it. Instead, they must create their own fortune by seizing opportunities that arise and adjusting their methods as needed. Adaptability, therefore, is what separates the leaders who survive from those who perish. At the end of The Prince, Machiavelli makes it clear. Political success is not about controlling destiny, but about learning to navigate it with intelligence and flexibility. Throughout The Prince, Machiavelli not only exposes the harsh realities of power, but also offers a guide for dealing with them. He teaches that ruling requires more than virtue. It requires strategy, courage, and above all, a deep understanding of human nature. Machiavelli's advice to abandon idealism, accept the necessity of power, use cruelty strategically, avoid complacency, and remain adaptable continues to resonate centuries later. Although often viewed as cynical, his work serves as a reminder that power is a neutral tool, one that can be used both to build and to destroy. For those seeking to understand the game of power, The Prince is an essential read. It is not a manual for tyrants, but an invitation to see the world as it truly is, immoral, complex, and above all, unpredictable.